Thank you, Jenny, and good evening to you all. I can see some of you, but not everybody, but I hope you can see and hear me. That's the main thing. This talk is based on a little book that I produced just at the beginning of lockdown, actually, and it's been published by the Blavatsky Trust. So I'm very, very pleased with that. And how this all came about is really quite strange. I was reminding Jenny earlier on before we started that I was walking in Pembrokeshire with a friend, and I suddenly had a telephone call from Maureen. Some of you may know Maureen, asking me, could I help out at summer school? And my response to Maureen was, well, I've only got the diploma in Theosophy, but I have more knowledge about world religions. Anyway, I came up with an idea, and this book is basically based on the seminars that I gave quite a few years ago. So what I decided was, I think there are three things that most people want to try and get their heads around, try and understand. So to begin with, what on earth do we mean by the word God? Or sometimes it's called the absolute, or the oneness, or the divine. What on earth is that? So that was the first topic. And I thought, right, I'm going to see what Theosophy has to say, and then we'll look at some of the world religions. And then the second topic was reincarnation and rebirth. Again, what does Theosophy offer us? And what have we got in other world faiths? And then the final one, which most people, I think, wonder about, is death. There's no escaping it. It'll happen to all of us at some point in time. What happens, and is there anything beyond it? Now, some of you may know Tim Wyatt, and I know that Tim has spent a huge amount of research on that. So maybe I won't go into it as much depth as Tim would, but I want to start off with this idea of what on earth do we mean by God, or the absolute, or the oneness? So let's refresh our minds, first of all, with what Theosophy says. So in essence, I understand that Theosophy reveals that humankind is essentially a spirit, a unit of, but inseparable from the all-pervading spirit which energizes all matter. That's what I understand. And then this spirit has been recognized by all the great religions under the name of God, or the divine. And even so-called materialistic science, by its unraveling of the secrets of the world of matter, from subatom to galaxy, is moving towards this idea of the oneness, the unity of existence. This is very exciting, what is coming up in the scientific world that is approaching what Theosophy has always said, and many of the great faiths as well. Now then, as human beings gain inner self-knowledge, they will realize their identity with this universal essence. Full realization of it is described as liberation or illumination, words like that. Esoteric philosophy teaches that this one life pervades the whole of visible nature, and that the total universe, or the cosmos, includes invisible modes of being which are animated by the one life. Now, that's my understanding of what Theosophy shares with us, and it resonates with me, and it makes sense. Now, when I first encountered Theosophy, Jenny, and I think it was the summer school in, I'm trying to think, Nottingham, that was it. And I was sitting on various seminars and lectures, and I thought, gosh, that sounds like Hinduism. And then no, that sounds like Buddhism. And then there were other things that I thought, well, I've never heard that before. So I was absolutely intrigued. So when I go on to Hinduism with this idea of what do we mean by God, by the way, personally, I feel that the word God causes huge problems. And I'll go on to that in a little while. It really does cause problems. Now then, if we go to Hinduism, some of you are aware, I'm sure, of the Rig Veda, one of the oldest scriptures in the world. And here it says the one life is recognized as transcending all human categories. In other words, it's impossible. How can you explain what it is? Hence, they use impersonal terms like it or that, which sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? But there's a reason why. However, God, or the One, has many attributes and functions and is therefore called by a variety of different names. I'm sure you are all aware of the absolute pantheon of deities, but actually they're all aspects of the One. Now then, here's an important word, Brahman, Brahman. This refers to the universal soul. It's uncreated. What on earth does that mean? It's limitless, right? I think I can understand that. It's all embracing and it's eternal, and it underlies all existence and it animates all living beings, everything. And within the innermost self of each individual, there is something else called Atman, Atman. Now, this is the subtle essence of Brahman that is in everything that is sentient. Okay. Now, then Atman is different from both the personality and the self, for it is nothing less than the eternal within each one of us. It's a constant amidst the ever-changing activities of the universe. It's the invisible and subtle essence that is the spirit of the whole cosmos. A person's realization of the identity and unity of Atman and Brahman is believed to bring about liberation. The word moksha is used because in that moment that he or she realizes this, then a freedom, something happens from all restraints of the mind and body, and therefore, and thereby transcends all distinctions. This is what we're all searching for. Maybe we have a little understanding of it, but there are still certain doubts and fears, maybe, in the minds of some of us. So realizing this ultimate truth is not easy at all. And the Chandogya Upanishad likens this learning process to crossing an ocean of suffering. I'm sure you'll all agree with me there. And during this terrible pandemic and other things going on our planet at this present moment in time, the suffering has become so apparent. The Upanishads were composed from about the 6th century BCE onwards, and they speak about a cosmic spirit, which is infinite, creative, benevolent, and deathless. And it's the final transcendent truth, and it is the ultimate consciousness which animates all conscious beings. It's a vast, ageless ocean of which everything that is experienced is only a wave. This is absolutely mind-blowing stuff. When I was studying theology a million years ago, it feels like now. In those days, we did Judeo-Christian theology, but I was invited, and all the students with me, we were invited to choose a religion outside of the Abrahamic traditions. And for some reason, I was drawn to Hinduism, and there was very little information around. But I have to tell you, or Sanatana Dharma, as it's properly called, when I started digging into this to produce my dissertation, I was totally blown away by it. Because for me, it made far more sense than anything else I had encountered before. Now, I'm going to tip into something that I personally have found a huge revelation. We're all aware of Jesus, better known, his real name was Yeshua. And when we look at the Christian tradition as it is now in the Western world particularly, it's very, very sad that what he was really about, I feel, has been lost. Now, whether this is deliberate or not, it could well be, but I feel so much has been lost. And a good many years ago, I was invited by a nun, an Anglican nun, a young one, to get hold of this book. I don't know if you can see it, Prayers of the Cosmos by Dr. Neil Douglas Klotz. So I sent for this book, and I was flying out to New York. So this is going back a long time ago. And I have to say, some of you know this because I was, well, I can't tell you, it was such a revelation, this. Douglas Klotz has spent an incredible amount of time digging into the original language of Jesus, Yeshua, which was Aramaic. And the Aramaic language has so many levels of meaning. It really is incredible. And when you start looking at it, you think, goodness me, anyone who's ever attended church would never have been told any of this. It's just not shared. So for example, if we look at the major traditions of the Middle East, what we call the Abrahamic faiths, we've got certain words that come from a same root. So for example, all of them referred to the divine as El or Al, which means that, or the one. And then from that root came other sacred names like Elat, which is Old Canaanite, Elohim, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that, which is Hebrew, Alacha, which is Aramaic, and Allah, which is Arabic. Now then, no gender has come into that at all, anywhere. This is very, very important. And so the Lord's Prayer, as we have been given it here in the Western world, quite frankly, has lost the beginning, the original meaning of what Jesus shared with his followers. The Aramaic is on so many levels of understanding that it is mind-blowing. I can't recommend this little book enough, Prayers of the Cosmos by Neil Douglas Klotz. If you haven't read it, please do. Now, when I was putting together this little book, published by the Blavatsky Trust, I got hold of Dr. Neil Douglas Klotz and said, look, Neil, I want to include your interpretation of the prayer, blah, blah, blah. And so we came up to an agreement of what he could share with me, because unfortunately, it's a bit complicated, but he lost the rights to this book. Isn't it awful? And so there are certain things that we could use and some things we couldn't use. So anyway, we came up with a compromise. And so I'm going to attempt to chant it to you, because the Aramaic would have been chanted. And if any of you know anything about Hebrew and have witnessed what a cantor does in a synagogue, and you watch these people in prayer, Then there is what they call body prayer. They rock, the whole energy of the person is engaged in the prayer. Now, I'm not going to say that my Aramaic is brilliant. It's a very, very difficult language to pronounce, but I am going to try and chant it for you. And then afterwards, I will give a very simple interpretation of what it means, but in actual fact, it has layers and layers and layers of meaning. It's profound. Here we go. Abun de boashmaya neskadashmak nitkadishmak te malkuta nechoy se bianach I cannot de boashmaya farha Hauglan lachma, sun konan yaumana, washboklan, kaibein wachtachein, I kana darknan shwoklan, lachaye yabein, wela tachlan, linyasiuna. Ela patsan min bisha metol delachi malkuta wa chela watesh buchta lachleim almin yemin. O Bertha, Father, Mother of the Cosmos, you create all that moves in light. Focus your light within us. Make it useful as the rays of a beacon show the way. Create your reign of unity now through our fiery hearts and willing hands. Your one desire then acts with ours. As in all light, so in all forms. Grant what we need each day in bread and insight. The call of bringing life in us. As we release the strand we hold of others' guilt, let us enter in forgetfulness. But free us from unripeness. From you is born all ruling will, the power and the life to do, the song that beautifies all from age to age as it renews. Truly, power to these statements. May they be the source from which all my actions grow, sealed in trust and faith. Amen. Now then, I don't know about you, but I don't think that sounds much like the Lord's Prayer that we have been taught. We've only got to look at the first line of the Lord's Prayer as it is used in churches today. And it starts off, Our Father, who art in heaven. And straight away we have a gender given to the Almighty. Who art in heaven, where is that? And that is like a separation. And what Jesus, Yeshua, taught was that God, or the divine, is within us and within everything that exists. Now, I think that's desperately important, and it's so sad that that's been lost. Okay, the next thing to look at is reincarnation. And with Theosophy, my understanding is that we are told this: while the forms of which life manifests itself are temporal, life itself, the spirit or essence is everlasting. Now, when you come across that concept, that is incredibly exciting because it suggests straight away, and Jesus said it too, he did. If we are part of the divine or the absolute, then we have always existed and we always will. That's quite something. So this isn't a linear idea of time and existence. Now then, this, whatever it is, life that manifests itself here in this material dimension, it particularizes itself in the individual human as an individual unit of consciousness. Now, this is complicated stuff, but Theosophists have a good idea of what this is all about. This unit unfolds its spiritual powers by successively assuming physical bodies, passing through birth to death to birth many times. In fact, forever, it has always been doing it. The nature of the individual in each incarnation, his or her personality and the circumstances are determined by the individual's actions and experiences in previous lives. This, as we know, is the law of karma, a law of action and reaction, which is a just law. We create our own existence. Now then, if we look at Hinduism, we're going to expect to find it here. Yes, most definitely. No question. And what does Hinduism have to say? Well, again, I've tried to make it as simple and as clear. It's very complicated, but I try my best to simplify everything. And if I take from some of the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad-Gita, let's have a look at that. Well, what does that have to say? Okay, quote, as a man casting off worn out garments taketh new ones, so the dweller in the body, casting off worn out bodies, entereth into others that are new. Okay, that's the Bhagavad-Gita. And look at the Katha Upanishad. What does that say? Like corn, a man ripens and falls to the ground, and like corn, he springs up again in his season. Okay, so to the Hindu, the soul then is essentially stuck in a never-ending cycle of rebirth, which can never be broken due to the continual need to balance one's karma. In effect, with each incarnation into the flesh, the human personality, a byproduct of the underlying soul that birthed it, accumulates a degree of bad karma that must be worked off in order to restore balance to itself. Right, now then, I'm going to leap on from there to beloved Prince Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha Shakyamuni. Some of you will know him, the Buddha of this age. Now, you know that he grew up in a Hindu family. So this belief system was part of his culture. So at the time of Buddha Shakyamuni then, people saw the soul or the Atman that I spoke about earlier on as being trapped in Samsara. I'm sure you've come across that word. Samsara is the world and karmic cycle of rebirths. And there are many dimensions of samsara. Now, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who was born a Hindu, as I say, made it his life's quest to find the way to break. How can I break this endless wheel of suffering and countless rebirths? Is this going on forever and ever? Is there some way out of this? And as you know, after much hardship and many trials, he attained the awakened state of enlightenment. And he claimed that he had found the answer. I mean, during this incredible meditation that he went through, he remembered his former lives as well. And in essence, what Buddha Shakyamuni said was, by transforming greed, hatred, and ignorance into non-attachment, compassion, and wisdom, each person is capable of finding release from the suffering of samsara. And he produced something we know as the Noble Eightfold Path, in which he explained the importance of wisdom, morality, and meditation. According to the Buddha, following the Noble Eightfold Path is like entering a dark room with a light in your hand, and suddenly the darkness is cleared away and the room is filled with light. That's what we're all looking for, I think. Yes. Now then, according to the Buddhist scripture, the Dhammapada, I'm sure some of you have come across that. It says this, what we are today comes from our thoughts of yesterday. Our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. And our life is the creation of our mind. If a man speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows him, as the wheel of the cart follows the beast that draws the cart. If a man speaks or acts with a pure mind, joy follows him as his shadow. So it's all up to us. We are in the driving seat here. This is our responsibility. Now, although Buddhists believe in cause and effect, karma, they do not believe that there is total continuity between one life and the next. And for this reason, they do not use the term reincarnation, which means to become flesh again, because this implies the entry of a soul into a sequence of bodily existence. Now, I don't think we've got time to go into this in depth, but there is a subtle difference between the way Buddhists look at this and the way Hindus look at it. So they prefer the word rebirth. And they believe that one life is caused by the next in the same way that a flame from a candle causes a second flame. There is a connection, there is a link, but it is separate. The two flames are not the same, but the first provided the cause for the second. So the person in one life is both continuous with, yet different from the person in the next life. I believe Theosophy says this as well. Whatever personality I am in this life is not the personality that I was in my last life, and it will not be the personality that I will be in my next life. They are quite separate. Now then, this continuity is also a future. Think about it. This is true of us within one life span. We die to the last moment and are reborn to the next moment. It's an ongoing process of constant change and connectedness through causation. One thing causes another. Buddhists call this dependent arising or interdependent origination. Okay, now I've got some other faiths here that I've brought into this scene. Would you expect anything in Islam now then on this theme? Would you? No, surely not. Islam rejects the idea of reincarnation. However, there are several curious references in the Holy Quran that seem to suggest it. See what you make of this. This is from Surah 2:28. Quote, God generates beings and sends them back over and over again until they return to him. How can you make denial of Allah, who made you alive again when you died, will make you dead again and then alive again until you finally return to him? Now, I don't know about you, but that to me sounds a bit like reincarnation. Of course, we would need a sheikh here to debate this with, because the way I read that, that really sounds like reincarnation. And then, of course, the Sufi Mystics within Islam. Most of you, I should think, have heard of Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi, the wonderful 13th century poet, the Persian, who lived 1207 to 73. He considered them, the Sufis considered themselves the custodians of the true teaching of their prophet, which they understood to advocate universal brotherhood. Well, that's something Theosophists believe in. And they advocated this universal brotherhood. Now, some of you may be aware also that certain Muslims denounced the Sufis as heretics. This happens, doesn't it? Every now and again, one lot will try and demolish the others and say, no, that's wrong, that's heretical. Well, anyway, in response, the Sufis warned their fellow Muslims of the dangers of religious intolerance. And yes, it still goes on. I'm going to take a quote from Rumi and see how you interpret this, because when I read this, I thought, wow, that sounds like Theosophy. See what you make of it. Like grass, I have grown over and over again. I passed out of mineral form and lived as a plant. From plant, I was lifted up to be an animal. Then I put away the animal form and took on a human shape. Why should I fear that if I died, I shall be lost? I find that quite incredible. After Rumi's death, the followers founded the Mevlevi order. Some of you know them as the Whirling Dervishes. And Jenny, you were there in Llandaff Cathedral when we did that big event for world peace with the Peace Mala project. And Sheikh Ahmed Dede came with the whirler and so forth. And that is quite an amazing, wonderful, beautiful spiritual thing to see and experience. So does Islam believe in reincarnation? Well, we've got a few things to debate with them. I'm going to go on to an older faith, Judaism. Surely there's nothing there. They don't believe in it, do they? Okay, modern Orthodox Judaism rejects the possibility of reincarnation, although traditional Jewish services feature prayers asking for forgiveness for our sins committed in both the present life and in previous incarnations. Excuse me, what on earth does that mean? Well, then the Jewish mystics, the Kabbalists, they accept reincarnation. They got no issue with this at all. And according to the Zohar, which is thought to have been compiled in 80 CE and eventually published by Rabbi Moses de Leon in 1280, quote, all souls are subject to the trials of transmigration, and men do not know the designs of the Most High with regard to them. They do not know how many transmigrations and mysterious trials they must undergo. According to Kabbalistic tradition, each human soul is a spark of the divine, which acquired bodies of increasing density during its descent into matter. Each individual comprises 4 elements: a physical body, a psyche, a vital soul, and the divine spark. That's interesting, isn't it? There's some similarities there with Theosophy. And according to Rabbi Yonasan Gershom, who was the author of an incredible book I came across, Beyond the Ashes, Cases of Reincarnation, Holocaust, published in 1993. According to him, reincarnation became part of the mystical Hasidic tradition in Eastern Europe and continues to this very day. And then we have Isaac Luria, a 16th century rabbi, one of the greatest Jewish mystics of all time, taught reincarnation, as did Israel ben Eliezer, known as Baal Shem Tov. He founded the Hasidic movement. So they're all saying, yes. The mystical Jews are saying, yes, 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 of course. Now, I have a dear Orthodox Jewish friend, and she is one of the senior trustees with the Peace Mala Project. And when I suggested this to her many, many, many years ago, she dismissed it. She said, no, 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 we don't believe that. But we've had lots of debates and discussions since. And I said, okay, Norma, what about the Lubavitcher version of the prayer? A bedtime prayer which says this: anyone who has anger and asks for forgiveness, anyone who has angered me or vexed me in this incarnation or any other. I said, now, Norma, is that in the prayer? Yes, it is. Well, I said, what on earth does that mean? So I've got Norma thinking now, well, maybe, who knows? This Rabbi Yonasan Gershom, who came out with this astonishing book, Beyond the Ashes, Cases of Reincarnation from the Holocaust, he relates, this is absolutely fascinating, he relates several case histories of people who have vivid, haunting memories of a past life during the Holocaust, causing phobias and other symptoms in their current life. Most cases are from people born in the 40s and 50s. And in his book, Rabbi Gershom gives reasons why these souls rushed back to experience an earthly incarnation. And he's done another book since then, published in 2000, Jewish Tales of Reincarnation. And again, he shares fascinating stories from Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts, and reincarnation is their central theme. Okay, so we've got 2 Abrahamic faiths there that seem to be talking about reincarnation. Well, what about Christianity then? Nah, you ask any priest today. I remember a Greek Orthodox priest coming into one of my lessons when I was still teaching. And the youngsters, the teenagers with me, we had just been studying Hinduism. And so they put the question to this Greek Orthodox priest, oh, Father, do you believe in reincarnation? And of course he dismissed it. No, 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 he said. No, we don't believe that. God wouldn't be so cruel. Well, okay. Well, if any of you have looked, and I know that when I was studying theology with church history, we weren't told anything about what I'm going to share with you now. We just weren't told it. And I keep asking, well, what's all that about? What's all that about? Right, reincarnation of the old prophets were on the minds of the Jews at the time of Jesus. In fact, followers of Jesus thought that he was a reincarnated prophet. The Jews, you will remember, at that point in history were waiting for the arrival of their Messiah, the anointed one of God, whose appearance would be announced by the prophet Elias or Elijah. And if we look at Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, some of you will remember this incident where Jesus and his disciples are in the north of Israel, in an area called Caesarea Philippi. And when they're there, he asks his disciples these questions. Whom do men say I, the Son of God, am? And they said, some say thou art John the Baptist, some say you are Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. So what's that all about? In fact, reincarnation was a core concept in the early years of Christianity. A number of the early Christian church fathers believed in and wrote about reincarnation. Saint Justin Martyr, 100 to 165 AD, he expressly stated that the soul inhabits more than one human body, okay? Origen, 185 to 254 AD, who was considered by Saint Jerome as the greatest teacher of the church after the apostles, he defended the idea that the soul exists before the body and that this is a fundamental concept of reincarnation. And then we've got another early church father, Saint Gregory, Bishop of Nyssa. He said, it is absolutely necessary that the soul should be healed and purified. And if this does not take place during its life on earth, it must be accomplished in future lives. The soul is immaterial and invisible in nature. It at one time puts off one body and exchanges it for a second. And then we've got St. Gregory goes on and he said, every soul comes into this world strengthened by the victories or weakened by the defeats of the previous life. Right. Saint Augustine, 354 to 430 AD, one of the greatest theologians of the Christian church. He speculated that Plotinus was the reincarnation of Plato. And Saint Augustine wrote, the message of Plato now shines forth mainly in Plotinus. A Platonist so like his master that one would think that Plato is born again in Plotinus. And then we've got other early church fathers who demonstrated a belief in reincarnation, and they included Synesius, the Bishop of Ptolemais, Saint Ambrose, Pope Gregory I, Jerome, Saint Athanasius, Saint Basil, Saint John Chrysostom is a mouthful, Saint Gregory of Nazianzus, and Clement of Alexandria. We've got a whole bunch of them there teaching reincarnation. What's happened? What happened? For centuries, this was the mainstream view of Christianity, but later it became a huge issue and the belief was made illegal. Why? Well, because Emperor Constantine believed it was dangerous to the empire to believe in reincarnation. I wonder what's dangerous about it. Maybe we can talk about that later. And it was finally banished from the teachings of the church by Emperor Justinian. In 545 CE, he was able to apply the full power of Rome and his authority to stop the belief in reincarnation. He forced the ruling cardinals to draft a papal decree to that effect. And the actual decree states this: if anyone asserts the fabulous pre-existence of souls and shall assert the monstrous restoration which follows from it, let him be anathema. And this is the anathemas against Oregon, attached to the decrees of the Fifth Ecumenical Council, which took place in 545 AD in Nicene. And then we've got post-Nicene fathers. And some of you are aware of the Nicene Creed that is said in Christian churches too, which one thing it says is that Jesus is the one and only Son of God. Jesus never claimed that he was God. He never wanted to be worshipped. All he said was, follow me. That's very, very different from worship me. Okay, then we've got Pope Vigilius at the time refused to sign this papal decree condemning Oregon's teachings on reincarnation. He refused. And as a result of his disobedience, the emperor had the Pope arrested and put into jail. There we are. That's the way to sort people, isn't it? If they don't agree, we'll shut them up. In 543, Justinian convoked the Fifth General Council of the Church, and he told the Pope that he would sign whatever the council decided into doctrine. In other words, I am telling you, you will sign it. Apparently, on the way there, under guard, the Pope escaped to avoid being forced to condemn Oregon's writings. The emperor demanded the council to continue despite the Pope's refusal to attend. What does it mean when it says monstrous restoration? Right, this is aimed straight at the teachings handed down from Yeshua, Jesus himself, to his disciples, that mankind comes from God and is destined to become one with God as he was. The Atman within us, the divine spark that links everybody with the absolute. So poor old Oregon, he was imprisoned and he was tortured. This is what they tend to do, isn't it? He survived though, miraculously, and died several years later. His tomb is at Tyre. He was held in honor, and its long survival is attested by historians of the period of the Crusades. Jesus and his disciples spoke of ascending to heaven in spirit after having discarded the physical body. According to the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus appeared to his followers in spirit to prove that the soul survives death. Later selective editing of the Gospels by those with vested interests took this to mean physical resurrection. And some will go so far as to say that this is actually an invention of the church and is contrary to the teachings of Jesus. Oregon's writings, which have been perceived as profound spiritual wisdom for 3 centuries, were now considered heresy. And for these reasons, Oregon was never canonized by either the Catholic or the Orthodox churches. His texts about the subject were deliberately destroyed. And many Christians today have absolutely no idea that reincarnation was an early Christian belief. And with the condemnation of Oregon, so much that is implied in reincarnation was officially stigmatized as heresy, that the possibility of a direct confrontation with this belief was effectively removed from the church. In dismissing Oregon from its midst, the church only indirectly addressed itself to the issue of reincarnation. And with the exception of the liberal Catholic Church, which was founded by members of the Theosophical Society, with the exception of those, to my understanding, the church continues to reject the belief of reincarnation. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm just going to touch on death. We're not going to have time to go into everything that's in this little book, but from the Theosophical point of view, life is an expression of spirit endlessly manifesting in form. Being alternates with non-being according to the universal cyclic law. Our body dies. The soul, the psychic mechanism of consciousness between body and spirit, is also temporal. And the term soul designates the thinking, feeling self of everyday experience housed in the physical body and is mortal like that body. And this is what we call the personality. The individualized spirit, though, persists. Spirit alone, described as a spark or a ray of the divine life, is immortal. This is the enduring individuality. Death is seen very much as a process rather than an event. At first, the after death state is a process where the experience of the past life is assimilated. The etheric double, now separated from its physical companion, gradually disintegrates, and the entity passes into the karma loka. Then follows the second death, when all temporal elements are left behind, and the entity passes into the Devicham, the land of the gods, a condition of mental bliss. And here the ego enjoys a restorative state until ready for a new earth life. Now, Hinduism will agree with much of that. Okay, and some of you know the song Celestial from Sir Edwin Arnold, from the Bhagavad-Gita. And I won't read it because we're running out of time. In Buddhism, we have, certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the bardos, the different stages after death, which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, the different stages that one goes through. Judaism believes in life beyond death, most certainly, but they don't go into any great depth about what happens. The Jewish faith is more concerned with life here and now, and to live this life well, l'chaim, to life, yeah? So there isn't a lot, they do believe in life beyond death, but there isn't much, there's not much there. And when we come to the Christian religion as it stands now, I feel there's even more confusion. I'm sure everyone here this evening has attended at some point in time a Christian funeral. And depending on the minister or the priest who is leading that funeral service, it's very, very confusing, because I've heard priests saying that the departed is now into a state of rest in peace, i.e. you are asleep until the end of time, the last judgment and all that. And then there will be others who will say that the departed person will now meet with members of family who have gone before. Well, excuse me, is it one or the other? It's very, very, very confusing. You have some Christians who believe in the second coming of Jesus at the end of time, the parousia. And then you'll have others who say, no, 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 that's not what it means. So there's an awful lot of confusion in Christianity. It's not very helpful, and it depends on which priest or minister you talk to and how they have been trained. When we look at Islam, we've got some mixed stuff here again. If you're going to straight Islam, it's again possibilities of going into the hell dimensions if you have sinned, or into some heavenly paradise with Allah. But then you go to the Sufi Masters and they are saying something different. And I rather like this. The Sufi Masters teach that after death, a person judges himself, thereby bringing about their own heaven or hell. And of course, Sufism is known as the way of the heart, the way of the pure. And it's a means by which one can move from the lower level of self to ascend to the divine light that penetrates the entire universe. This light concept is common to many other religions, as well as the near-death experience. I'm whizzing now. I'm not going to go into all of this. We've run out of time, but I will touch on very, very briefly near-death and out-of-the-body experiences, and more research is being done about this now. Many books have been produced. One of my friends, Dr. Penny Satori, has produced 2 books on this, and prior to her research, Penny worked in IT, the intensive care. She was an intensive care nurse and witnessed many, many deaths. And then she started doing research and eventually did her doctorate on this. And her view of it all changed completely. She said, there is most definitely life beyond this existence. And somebody that Penny knows very well, and I got in touch with him too, Dr. Eben Alexander, some of you might know of him, and he, his book is worth reading, Proof of Heaven, it's called. He is an eminent American neurosurgeon. And in this book, Proof of Heaven, Eben describes his astonishing experiences while he fell into a coma after suffering a rare form of bacterial meningitis. He shouldn't have survived. And he shouldn't have come back to his senses either. So there's more and more stuff being written about this. And as for out-of-the-body experiences, I can simply share with you that over the years of 34 years of mainstream teaching with teenagers, I encountered quite a number of youngsters who described to me incredible experiences that they had of being outside of their body, looking down on themselves. And there was a member of staff in the mathematics department in the last school where I taught who said that he regularly went on astral travel. I'm going to stop there. I think I've said more than enough, and I hand it over to you. for anything you'd like to ask. I won't necessarily have the answers, or if there's anything that people would like to share with us. I'm sure there are people present this evening who have had incredible experiences. Anyway, over to you. Thank you. Thank you for listening.